Supply Chain Talk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Good afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Supply Chain Talk. My name's Alistair Chariton, your host this week. And our main topic is on becoming a transformative supply chain leader. So as we all know, supply chains have always been very complex and varied. We need to focus on anything from sourcing and buying through to importing, running warehouses and fleets, as well as satisfying our customers or demanding internal sales teams. And of course, now there's even more complexity with automation, AI, traceability, just to name a few of the new trends that we have to deal with. So that challenge of becoming a successful, transformative supply chain leader is becoming ever greater. And there's the dual challenge in a way of probably having to transform an actual supply chain, as well as in a way transforming and bringing your teams with you. So that's our main topic today. But before then, as always, we will discuss a news item related to the main topic. And we welcome your comments in the chat panel on the right-hand side and your questions, and we'll try and address some of those as the episode progresses. But the audience always do appreciate seeing the chat there and the comments that you may like to share. And we'll be awarding a Supply Chain Talk mug to the contribution we value most this afternoon. So let me now introduce my four guests. And the first of these is Derek Westfall, who is Supply Chain Professor at Portland State University, so based in Portland. Welcome, Derek. He is a Supply Chain faculty member at Portland State University and is currently the president of Westfall Consulting Group. And he recently retired from the Boeing Company and has 35 years of supply chain experience. My second guest is Francesco Lucetta, who is Group Sourcing Leader at Pentair. Pentair Industrial Solutions work in the areas of purification of water and waste with products that include mechanical and industrial engineered solutions and they vary up to life science and medical devices as well. And Francesco has extensive international experience in leading global and regional organizations acquired across the business value chain of multinational and privately owned corporations. And he has a particular focus on strategic sourcing. He's also managed mergers and acquisitions and business divestitures and has built high-performing strategic performing organizations. And he has an executive MBA from HEC Lausanne and is a visiting professor at the Business School of Lausanne and is based in Switzerland. Welcome, Francesco. My third guest is Sanja Kanka Todorovic, who is Head of Enterprise Procurement and Outsourcing and Third-Party Risk Management at Home Capital Group Incorporated, which is a financial services company in Toronto, where Sanja is based. Sanja has over 20 years of experience in large global organizations, and she is a passionate leader in customer experience, strategy, and transformation. And in her field of procurement and vendor management, she drives technological innovation and transformation, corporate culture evolution, and cost and quality streamlining. Welcome, Sanja. And finally, Maitham Al-Karula is VP of Procurement and Business Support at OSN, a pay TV operator based in Dubai with customers across the Middle East and North Africa region. Maitham has 21 years of experience in procurement and supply chain. And in addition to that, he has also managed field services and facilities, as well as content protection teams throughout his career. And as mentioned, he's based in Dubai. So we've got a huge, a really multinational panel today, and welcome all four of you. Let's move then to our news item, which is just from a week or two back, earlier in July. It was published as in Supply Chain Management Review website by one of their editors, Bridget McCree, and it's called The Changing Face of Supply Chain Executive Education. It's quite a long article, but the key things it's really looking at is the fact that kind of supply chain has always been an area where executive education is important, given how dynamic and complex it is, and given all the different new knowledge, skills, and expertise that's needed. Some of the points I mentioned earlier, schools and other educational providers have been honing their programs in response to those new needs. And there's a quote that the academic world has absolutely exploded when it comes to supply chain and executive education. It mentions also that executives who complete certification programs can bolster their earnings, Always challenge those sorts of things. Is it cause and effect, or the fact that good people are the ones who want to do get their certifications? But anyway, it's clearly a good thing to get supply chain education and certifications. And it also talks about some interesting trends, which is how education can help, as it describes them, as veteran executives who started in entry-level jobs, how it can really help them get that sort of perhaps more professional learning to then get promoted up from, warehouse employee to a warehouse manager and later to a VP of supply chain, for example, where they may not otherwise have had a formal supply chain education. And then I guess the sort of final part of the article talks about some of the trends in the actual sort of format of supply chain education. Clearly, with COVID, a lot of it moved online, which can be very effective and convenient, but now more of it has been moving back into the classroom or to company physical sites, company locations. So, and at the very end, for those of you interested, do have a look, because it does list a lot of useful associations and business schools and other colleges with relevant courses focusing on the US, but it may be of interest to some of you. So, supply chain executive education. Derek, as someone who, in a way, works in certainly in the undergraduate field, and I'm sure you work with executives as well. What are your thoughts on how important executive education is in developing supply chain leaders? And you're on mute.
Yeah. So education, I think, to be a leader, especially in supply chain, there needs to be I would say, a much higher than average knowledge of supply chain. Like, I think you should know how the end-to-end supply chain works, or, all the way from sourcing products to making the products to delivering the products. But that's how I got my career started. I was a warehouse guy, and they said, "Hey, would you like to move into production planning?" And I wasn't even really sure what that was. And I took these certification courses and got certified. And then that was just one of the many certifications that I've accomplished throughout my career. But yeah, so the education part is foundational, but also being a transformational leader is being able to provide that picture to your staff or your coworkers or your people that report to you of what your vision is to drive this change that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. And I hadn't realised that's really interesting that you started your early career, right on the warehouse floor, which does give you that great operational understanding. Francesco, how do you see supply chain education fitting into to developing people?
Let me say that the first thing that we are seeing on the market is a bunch of extremely well prepared candidates, even at the beginning of their career. I had the chance to comment on this a few days ago in another interview, which was exactly, insisting on those topics. And he did say that I rarely have been seeing so many well-prepared people joining a procurement career at the very beginning. Which means that, of course, the quality was increasing and responding to a demand that especially in the last 3 years, was extremely higher than in the past, given all the supply chain and procurement problems that we experienced. And probably we were mutuating out of them real needs that were translated into the organizations at some point of time, with programs fitting well those needs and responding to that. Next, of course, a stable balance between what is the executive education and the preparation that could be given to students, and what is the the education to students and the executive educations that could be given to professionals joining maybe the procurement world at a later stage of their career. This is typically the case of technicians or engineers or sales managers, whoever that at some point of time has a turn in his or her career path and joins procurement out of specific needs of the company, like buying technical products and whatever. Those people are not necessarily prepared at a university level, at a business school level, in typical procurement topics. In there is a formation that is given by mostly specialized institutions or supporting formation entities directly inside of the company, or as a parallel program that I would say at the moment of time becomes really an executive program. And also on that side, we see huge progresses. So people that are able to embrace the challenges of a supply chain and procurement environment in a very well manner. What makes probably at that point of time a bit of a difference in who is willing next to prosecute on a career of supply chain is, of course, the attitude of the people and what they really like to do. And this is something that you can teach at the end.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So yeah, obviously you can teach skills, but attitude is a different thing. Sanya, what are your thoughts on how supply chain executive education fits in versus the other skills that may not be appropriate for that?
Yeah, so I will echo what the other panelists have mentioned. I think the education is a great foundation, but it's not the end of it all. And I say this because I have met many well-educated people with the non-existent EQ, and I think in our line of work, where you are constantly building on relationships, when you're constantly negotiating, when you're constantly working escalations or whatever the case might be, you really need to have that EQ at the higher level than probably a lot of other professions. So, I will say it's great, it's important, but it's just the foundation that you build on. It's not the end of it all. And I will say, Francesco mentioned something, and I just wanted to kind of add to it. I think the what we have seen in this industry in the last, if you want to look at the silver lining of COVID, is the last 3 years have really elevated this profession to the heights that we probably have never seen before. Where I think, supply chain procurement, strategic sourcing, vendor management, all of that has been seen as an enablement function in the past until March 2020, where it totally became a strategic partner role at every organization at the highest level of the organization as well. So that's kind of the if you want to call it a silver lining. And as a result, we have seen a lot more institutions now offering formal education that will actually get people through the door and learn more about supply chain and what that's all about. Where I don't think we had a lot of that, at least here in Canada, we haven't, probably up until a few years ago. So to conclude, it's important, it's foundation, but it's not the end of the road. There's a lot more that has to do, and it has to do with the EQ and relationship building and collaborative approach to doing your work.
Absolutely. It's an interesting point you make about obviously everyone is so much more aware of supply chains in the past few years than they were before. But nonetheless, there are few companies where the supply chain director is sitting on the main board, and I would guess there's not that many C-suite executives who necessarily have worked in supply chain or who have even had supply chain education. It's certainly, in a lot of MBA programs, it may not be a compulsory module. So I guess there's still potentially a way to go to build on that recognition of its importance. So Matham, please do add to the comments of the other panelists, but if you want to comment on that as well, I'm interested in your thoughts on how executive education fits in and its role at senior levels.
Yeah, thank you. What I found interesting in the article is when they mentioned that a lot of procurement professionals basically studied some non-procurement academic courses, such as finance, and they ended up through their career and journey into a supply chain role. And that meant that at that stage, some of the supply chain professionals had not received enough academic supply chain courses, and that's why a lot of them are doing a bit of catch up while they're on the job and they have the experience from the job. They're doing the training and the certification at a later stage, and I think that's a scenario that is quite valid across supply chain in general, and it does complement the on-the-job training experience as well.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I certainly, I'm sure all of you have had the same experience, that I've worked with people who've been in a supposed supply chain role for many years, and they just don't really understand the full context of what they're doing, and suddenly even quite a short course can really open their eyes and make them understand so much better what the purpose of what they're doing is, which I guess leads to the question of how one becomes a transformative supply chain leader, because to me that's certainly part of it, would be making sure your team do understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, rather than just kind of following processes. So the first point we have on our agenda is, what skill sets do supply chain leaders need to better develop their teams? And I guess there's that real question of how much is that around for the supply chain leader? How much is that around technical skills versus people management and leadership skills? So Derek, we touched on this already. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about that question, and I'm thinking it's like a 40-60 type thing. Like you have to have a pretty good knowledge of supply chain, like how they work end to end, right? To be a true leader, because you have to have those technical skills. You have to really understand how it works. But more importantly, in my mind, is those soft skills of developing your team, especially to be a transformative leader. You really have to think big and think how we're going to change this, especially in this day and age with everybody's supply chain changing. We're getting away from the efficient, the JIT, those types of things, low inventory, and now we're becoming more resilient. Well, that's going to provide a different model, right? So now, as a leader, in my mind, I don't have all the answers. Before I used to have all the answers. Now I don't have the answers. So I need to paint this vision of what I want my supply chain to look like in the future. And then I need to bring my team along, enable them to give them the tools to help us get there. Because I'm not going to be able to do this by myself. Right? Because I don't know what the future looks like. If you want this highly efficient JIT delivery, yeah, we can do that all day long. This all can design those supply chains. But what does the future look like? What's supply chain 4.0 look like? And so how are we going to get there? And that's what being a transformative leader really is painting that picture, enabling your teams to help us get there.
Yeah, thank you. Francesco, what are your thoughts on the skill sets that supply chain leaders need and that balance of the technical versus the people and other skills?
In my experience, it depends a lot also by the company you're working for and the business which is served by that company. There are companies where search in terms of technical skills is, of course, very higher, and so they prefer maybe to turn engineers into good buyers, into good commodity managers. There are companies which completely offset, I would say, the technical work out of the procurement table, creating clear specs so it could be managed by extremely good commercials, I would say. So it really depends. At a basic level, let me say that there are probably three main skills that need to be developed. Of course, influence and persuasion. And when I mention influence and persuasion, I do not mention manipulation. It's really influencing for results, for something that could bring common value at a cross-functional level, maybe. Negotiation, of course, and relationship management. Then those are the three skills that make us effective when it comes to face the outside world. Next, there are also the inside skills, which have to do with the knowledge of the processes and the management of the expectation of the company. But those, again, really depend by the objectives which are given. I know companies whose main focus is keeping the supplier delivering on time and whatever. So supply continuity comes to be the key area. And then strategies which have a good analytical skills and that could manage really the analysis over suppliers can work better. On the other side, there are companies that, of course, put their focus on cost reduction. And in that case, of course, there's a multi-source strategy that could play an important role, being able to negotiate at best and creating alternatives come to be most required skills.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. Sanya, I mean, your thoughts on this? I mean, just as an example, I've certainly seen some supply chain leaders who have been appointed really from a totally different function, and so they really haven't got the technical knowledge at all, but they're just great leaders, great at delegating, humble enough to seek the expertise and ask the dumb questions. Have you seen that kind of role, that kind of model work where you don't actually have the technical knowledge at all almost?
Yes, I have seen that. That's why that goes back to the comment I made earlier. Education is just the foundation. That it's not the end of the road. And I have seen leaders move from finance into procurement. I have seen leaders move from sales into procurement with no technical background. But the reason why they're successful is because they have the amazing leadership skills that allow them to, let's talk about the whole transformation thing. Like what procurement supply chain, the way it was 15, even 10 years ago, is not what we have today. I think the skill set that you need to have today are focused on information security, are focused on because you have to make sure that your third-party risk management is covered in the first onboarding layer of adding or onboarding new vendors. So you're now looking at a whole new skill set that 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago for that matter, wasn't as important. It was an afterthought. Also, the business continuity also plays into a role where maybe before it was a bit of a lip service that we say, yeah, check in the box. We talked about business continuity. It's part of the contract, but really no one ever tested it. It was just kind of assumed that, it's there, it's good. We'll probably never look at it. So let's not really bother. Let's not bother wasting time, going through the testing or whatever the case might be. Also with the advent of so many startups that we have, especially the tech sector, financial health became a very interesting topic. Because now you're putting all of your eggs into one basket, and that basket is a startup that might go belly up tomorrow. So my point is, there's all these new trends, all these new skills that really, they're not being taught, because what's being taught, it's educational. It's foundational knowledge regarding supply chain. So to your point, many leaders have moved over from one area into the procurement, into the supply chain, into the vendor management. And what made him successful is the ability to lead and to understand that, hey, you don't have to know it all. What you do have to know is how to clear the roadblocks and enable your people who are smart people, they know what they're doing, clear the roadblocks for them so that they can deliver on whatever their objectives are. And it goes back to the first comment I made. More than 50% of what we do is relationship-based in this industry. So EQ, empathy, ability to coach, is what will get you far and up the corporate ladder in this industry, more so than technical knowledge, because that will evolve.
Okay, that's great, Sanya. Thank you very much. Matham, your thoughts on this, on the skill sets needed?
Well, in preparation for this webinar, I looked at 4 globally acknowledged transformative supply chain leaders and tried to find a common denominator between them, their personality, and how it, and also, comparing the differences. So I looked at Tom Cook, obviously in Apple. He used to be the chief procurement officer. I looked at Jeff Bezos in Amazon, and obviously all the transformation in terms of last mile delivery, fulfillment centers. I looked at Elon Musk, obviously with the vertical integration in terms of the battery manufacturing and the supply of Tesla parts. I looked at Indira Noya from PepsiCo, who obviously focus a lot on sustainability and ethical working of supply chain, and then Ginny Rometty in IBM that invested a lot in technology. So the common denominator between all 5 of them is probably the innovative thinking, as we discussed, the focus on customer satisfaction, and the time they took trying to find real world problems and trying to solve them, and then obviously the investment in technology. But if you look at their management style, they're quite diverse. So some of them are more collaborative than others. Some of them tolerate, mistakes and, learning by making few mistakes on the way than others, and so on. So, the conclusion I had is, when it comes to management style, you can have probably a diversified management style, but still succeed because you have the other characteristics.
Yeah, those are really interesting examples. Thank you, Matham. And I'm sure we can all discuss the sort of already got me thinking, the pros and cons of the different management styles and the different levels of knowledge. But those are indeed 5 great examples of amazing supply chain leadership. Let's move on to thinking more across the supply chain and procurement teams of developing equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives across supply chain and procurement teams, and I guess we're even today there's sort of 3 male panelists and 1 female, and we've talked about this on previous episodes. It's still quite a male dominated function, I guess, if we call it a function, supply chain and procurement. So one could say we haven't necessarily become diverse enough, and as we talked about as well, the initiatives to develop people up from the warehouse floor or from the seat of a truck to become supply chain leaders. That's another type of equality and diversity to make sure we're not overlooking people and just assuming they'll stay there forever. So lots to think about there. Derek, what would your kind of insights and thoughts be there?
Yeah, I think as far as developing equity and diversity and inclusion is that I believe obviously big firms have already started this journey and are down the road, right? But as you've mentioned, it's very male dominated. Every business I've worked at and every business I've consulted at, even in my classrooms, it's more male dominated. Um, so how do we change that, right? I just think that we try and stay the course. We have plans. Most organizations have plans and have policies to introduce this topic or this subject and make it part of their culture. And again, this just like supply chain has been around forever. This topic's still fairly new, and so it's going to develop over time, right? And I don't think that it's not mature. It's going to develop over time, and so that's where most organizations are at, correct? And then, yeah, I think that's as far as developing people off the shop floor. Again, I'll go back to what I talked about earlier. Is that's how I started my career. I was a warehouse guy, and they said, "Hey, take these classes and move their way up." Now there's certainly more options than there was 35 years ago, but the in-house training. But the one thing that you really have to do is you have to have the budget for it. And it has to be part of your plan, right? Is that if we're going to offer these trainings, whatever they are, there has to be a budget for it, and it can't be this. It shouldn't be the employee's idea. It should be the organization's idea that we're going to develop training or we're going to commit a certain number or a certain amount of dollars to training, and that should be part of the program. Because a lot of organizations, medium-sized organizations, they may have an employee that has the desire to move up and to stay educated or get educated. Hey, I want to know about production planning, or I want to know about 3PLs or whatever, but they don't have this infrastructure to do anything with. And the company says, well, we don't really have funding on that. You have to do it yourself. And it's like, well, there's no incentive for me as an employee to do anything other than to move on.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a concentrated development plan and budget to have this training available.
Yeah, that's a really good point, the whole budgetary thing. And there is that interesting one, isn't there? And I've seen it myself in some of the work I do in business schools, that there is always a risk. You invest a lot in someone, and then, a year later they say, great, thanks for the education, thanks for the qualification, now I've got a better CV and I'm moving off. But equally, if you don't do something for them, they're the talented people who are going to say, well, kind of, you're not giving me any reason to stay, so I'm going to go. So there is always that
Yep.
question. Francesco, what are your thoughts on trying to encourage more equality, diversity, and inclusion in supply chain and procurement teams?
I have an experience in teaching, as a university professor, and I'm seeing exactly the same in terms really of applications that sometimes are received for specific courses. I don't have a perfect explanation. What I can say is that a team which is balanced works much better, into my experience, so that for the teams that I had the privilege to coach, a gender balance was very much required in order to keep stable conditions and to diversify enough also the delivery. There's probably, and I would really argue, there is no difference in delivering from a male or a female side into this world. So really both genders could be extremely well performing. I feel that they are much better performing when there is a good diversity into the team. So if a team is based only on males or only on females, usually they don't work as well as they work when they are mixed up in a good manner and well balanced. But I don't have, to be honest, the magic stick to understand why still this world comes to be more attractive already at a student level for one gender instead of the other. Unfortunately, this is something that probably we need to work out better. What I notice is that we have increased overall level of stress, and I wonder if this type of stress has a better fits better the aspirations or of specific individuals, but I don't still have the criteria of why an individual should be actually applying to a procurement role or to a procurement career, if this could be gender based or not.
Yeah,
that's a word that I need to explore better as well.
Yeah, and your point about stress is a very good one, actually. I think just that sort of the constant bombardment of emails and phone calls and Teams messages and Slack, it's just kind of, I think really it is really overloading people. It's very it's a real challenge of how to manage this sort of multi kind of media kind of environment that people are having to work in. I think it it clearly has its productivity benefits in some ways, but it can be very pressurizing in others. Sanya, I'm sure you've got some good insights on the diversity, equality, and inclusion side of things.
Yeah, so I'll start off because I don't want to give supply chain a really bad reputation, because it's not specific to this area. It is a society thing. And truth be told, we have amazing representation across all organizations, across most industries, at the entry level roles. But the further up you go, the levels, once you hit that middle management, the director, it tapers off dramatically to the point that we go into single digits. Now, so it's not specific to supply chain. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, when it comes to specific to the supply chain, I don't have the insight that Francesco has in terms of what the pipeline looks like of those students who are actually interested in the area. But what I do know for sure, and speaking from the experience, is that there's lack of education what supply chain, procurement, vendor management actually means. And to be quite honest with you, I've been in this field, it seems like forever. I don't want to age myself, but I didn't grow up thinking, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a supply chain professional. I want to be in procurement. Like, I didn't even know the job existed until somebody gave me an opportunity and pushed me into it. And that's when it kind of opened up this whole world that I am in right now. It was a pure fluke, pure coincidence. It wasn't planned. And I think maybe for most people, that's what the case is. But that's because we're not really doing a good job advertising this area. People don't simply know what supply chain means. Now, last 3 years might have changed it a little bit, because supply chain became the mainstream topic for a lot of organizations. So I'm hopeful that will help this whole initiative of getting more diverse opinions, because to Francesco's point, diversity of thought is what makes innovation happen. If you don't have it, it's like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So you need to inject diversity of thought, and that can only happen if you have some sort of equal representation of different diverse viewpoints that will kind of guide you into the direction that makes sense. And you know what? It makes business sense as well. It's not just a nice thing to do, especially if you're a publicly traded company and you have to report to your investors that you have this whole EDI nailed down. But it makes business sense as well, because diversity breeds innovation. And if you are having 50% of your clients, whatever that might be, doesn't matter which industry you're in, and it makes sense to have a leadership team that is just as diverse as your client base, because that's the only way that you can actually deliver to what your clients want at the end of the day. So I can probably talk for hours of this, but I'm not, because I don't want to bore everyone. But I just don't want supply chain to be have this awful reputation, because it's not just specific to supply chain.
Yeah,
all the industries across the board.
No, absolutely. And I can think back to my early career in retail many, many years ago, back in the 90s of, so 30 years ago. And I remember actually 2 of our big warehouses and a retailer were run by women. There were women as general managers, which I guess was a minority there, but, they were incredibly effective and certainly brought a very different style to leading what was mainly a male warehouse workforce. So you're absolutely right. It's we shouldn't damn ourselves too much. Some interesting comments from Grayson there. Thank you, Grayson, about one, picking up on that comment about the risk of people leaving, but absolutely right. We certainly shouldn't hold back developing people because we think they might go. But as Derek was saying, I guess with budgets being tight, sometimes it's just very difficult to justify to get the budgets for good training. And I guess that can be thrown at you sometimes as a leader to say, oh well, look, we lost the last person we invested a lot of money in. But I agree entirely, Grayson, it shouldn't be the main reason. And some very good comments there, picking up on what Sanya said. As we move on to the third point, which is Nathan, I haven't touched on you. Nathan, sorry, I just interrupted to pick up on some of those interesting comments. But Nathan, over to you for the thoughts on diversity and so on.
Yeah, thank you. So just to continue on what Sanya was mentioning, Gartner usually publishes every year the total workforce in supply chain in terms of gender. So out of the total workforce last year, 39% were female, and out of the C-level, only 19%. And obviously that's where, Sanya was mentioning, the higher you go up, the more, the gap becomes visible. These figures, by the way, are better than before, but obviously there is a lot to be done for proper equality and diversity to be established. So supply chain is a global function, and we really benefit obviously from having this, cultural mix. I would also extend it to the diversity of suppliers. So small and medium-sized businesses do make a big impact within their local communities. So if you talk about corporate social responsibility, if you talk about sustainability, it makes sense to also focus on not only internally on your team, but obviously on the extended supply coming from your suppliers globally as well. And equal pay is very important. So yes, maybe the percentage is improving in terms of the gender balance, but equal pay needs to be there as well.
Thank you, Emma.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Like, I just wanna
Go ahead,
say that, Meetham, like, thank you for bringing that up, because I totally neglected to. Supplier diversity, corporate supplier diversity programs are so beneficial, and the organizations, again, it's not a nice thing to do. There's a business sense that goes with that, and you see that organizations that venture out away from the usual suspects, these big, large vendors that we use for whatever, and at least give a chance to a diverse certified supplier, whatever that case might be. They do notice that these guys are a lot more agile, a lot more flexible, a lot more innovative, because they're hungry. They're hungry, and they're always trying to impress their clients. And with that fresh new ideas, that's when the innovation comes into play. And all the organizations that have a well-established supplier diversity programs are seeing not just improvement in the cost, not just improvement in the effectiveness and the quality, but also innovation and speed to market as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's an important topic.
Yeah, thank you. So our third point is around implementing an effective approach to your internal training and development. And just picking up on that, there was an earlier question from Bayram Harabi, and Bayram asks, what is the impact of AI on supply chain education? Which I think is a really interesting one to kind of work into this third point. I guess the question there is, can AI help on external training? Can it help on internal training? Does it mean we can develop much more modified and customized training internally a lot more effectively? So I don't know the answer. I don't know if you do. But so if we start with you, Derek, on whether you want to just talk about the effective approaches to internal training and development, or whether you'd like to kind of address that interesting question from Bayram. Over to you.
Yeah, I can address Bayram's question fairly simply. As an academic and teaching supply chain courses in a public university, AI is not even on the radar yet. It's like, that's not something that we talk about. It's like, we haven't caught up yet, right? We haven't caught up to that. So probably everybody on this call knows more about AI than myself, and so how can we use it is based on what I know. I mean, there's all kinds of, the potential is unlimited, obviously, down the road. But again, it's another thing that's still in its infancy, and how do we use it? I think that's TBD. That's to be determined, right? So, but getting back to the original question, well, I think this really comes down to being that transformative leader, right? Is that you put these things in place, these training and these development, especially the development part of the for your employees is you got to do the goal setting, you got to do the mentoring, those types of things to nurture these folks along, to build them up into the roles that we want them to fulfill later on and grow their careers, right? So again, I think it's part of the culture that we develop those tools and have those things ready. Like I just mentioned, the mentoring, the training, the goal setting, the career development, those types of things. That should be part of your culture if we're going to be true transformative leaders.
Thank you. So Francesco, I don't know if you've been involved in internal training programs and obviously employee development.
Yeah, that happens frequently. It's something that we have on the radar now. As Sanya was saying before, I guess that it's 4 to 5 years that our priority list changes continuously, sometimes even inside of the same financial year. And of course, this requires the development of different skill sets. So we need to be agile in defining what is the experience required, the training required in order to keep the people up to date. And I'm a fan of training for 2 reasons. First, it's part of the corporate responsibility. We have people working for a corporation. We need to train them whether or not they are staying with our corporation. If other corporations are doing the same, actually we just get a pool of better leaders and managers that we can share the moment they move across different positions. And so the general overall culture increases in terms of quality, and you get better candidates and better prepared professionals. The second reason is I really consider procurement and supply a pool of cross-functional talents. When someone asks me what are the KPIs you are mostly proud of, one of those that I usually tend to reply is the number of people that out of procurement and supply teams that I had the chance to coach and to lead were used or promoted into different roles inside of different functions. So it looks like anyway the complexity of the environment that we are managing really enables the people to be effective also in positions which are out of our scope, a little out of our boundaries. And that makes me a fan also of courses which are not specifically focused, which are not over specializing people on a given function.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting thought. It's back to that whole balance of the technical skills versus the wider management and people skills. So, Sanya, what sort of mix of training and other ways of developing people do you see in your organization?
I want to touch on the whole AI topic because I think it's such a hot topic. So it became. I was part of the beta testing for ChatGPT before it became a public thing to everyone. And I think to Derek's point, it's unlimited possibilities. However, where I think we're struggling right now is the whole security around it, because OpenAI, it's truly what it is. It's open platform. So whatever confidential proprietary information you put into it, you will get probably really good results. But at the same time, you're now exposing your company's data out into the universe, and there's no way to get it back. So I think there's a lot of issues around OpenAI and securities around it that a lot of organizations are actually blocking it off so that the employees wouldn't go ahead and engage with it. However, you have Microsoft Copilot as an example that has figured out the way to actually contain it all within the ecosystem of your organization, so it's secure on the company's cloud. And I think that's where we will probably see a lot more of AI usage within supply chain and other areas, not just supply chain, where basically you're using it as a knowledge database because it's contained within the ecosystem of your organization. It's not going outside of your organization, and you can use it as a central contract repository, as a central knowledge base where you will go into that secure. I'm going to say Microsoft Copilot, but it can be whatever. And you will say, hey, help me design whatever strategy for the next 3 years based on the numbers that we have in the AP system around vendors in this category. I just made that up. And this thing will be able to spit it out for you in a matter of seconds, where a human would probably take weeks to do it because you have to get information from all these different data clouds that you have internally.
Yeah. Okay, no, so really interesting thoughts there. So very briefly on sort of other areas of training, we're almost out of time. Did you want to any
other sorry, that was from me or from Ethan?
Yeah. Oh. You addressed the AI one. I didn't know.
Sorry. Francesco, no, I whatever, for everything Francesco said, I am aligned with that. We got to train up people. Whether they stay or leave, you got to do it. Because what if you don't and they stay?
Yeah. Thank you. But really some great examples and great insight there on the AI side of things. And finally, Matham, kind of your thoughts on the whole internal training and development and the different mix of tools to use there.
Yeah, so in general, supply chain professionals tend to be risk adverse, and that means that the barrier for getting the buy-in from a transformative leader is probably higher than other functions. So making sure that you address all the training gaps and that everyone is aligned with that vision, I think is quite important for a transformative leader. So continuous on-job training, mentorship, training by, rotating some of the staff in other departments, which are obviously, working closely with supply chain, and probably on market training, seeing the other side of the supply chain, and, the challenges which are faced by the customers. So being customer centric, I think is quite important from a training perspective as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Nathan, and thank you for being brief there, because we are out of time. So as always, so much to discuss, a really wide and interesting topic there. I hope our audience has got some useful insights out of that. Our next episode is not until September, because we have our summer break here. And so I would say, if you've been inspired at all by today's discussion, remember there are an awful lot of supply chain associations and courses which were listed on today's news article. And of course, there are institutions not based in the US, like the Business School of Lausanne, where Francesco teaches, and indeed Cranfield University, where I do some teaching. So do check out courses if you think that's something that you want to be looking at. And thank you again to my 4 guests: Derek Westfall, Supply Chain Professor at Portland State University; Francesco Lucetta, Group Sourcing Leader at Pentair; Sanja Kanka Todorovic, with a long title, at Home Capital Group Incorporated; and finally, Matham Al-Karula, VP of Procurement and Business Support at OSN. So thank you very much, all 4 of you. Thank you to our audience. And a final thing, the final thing before we break for the summer, let's send a Supply Chain Talk mug to Grayson Moores. Thank you, Grayson. Some great comments you added there. So much appreciated. And as Supply Chain Fawn says, our next episode is on September the 13th. So do make a note in your diaries then. Have a great summer vacation, and we'll see you in September. Goodbye.